Before we get started, I have a few things to say. I'm sorry if I confuse people at times. When I moved here, when I was in 8th grade, I was in Boy Scouts, and then when I moved back, one of my sons joined Boy Scouts, and I was a Scoutmaster. So one of the reasons I came back here is I love camping. But if the conditions aren't good, we don't go. We try to be safe. So I went camping 2 weeks ago, and the weather and everything was nice, but the following week we were going to go to some place a little bit more. That first place was very secluded, but the second place was not, and with all the COVID going on, we decided not to go. So I apologize if sometimes I'll say that I'm going to cancel class, but I'll show up to church anyhow. Usually that means that we were going camping and something was wrong, the weather was bad, or the conditions were not. We don't go if it's not bad. You know, good. I mean to say, you know, we pick times by the calendar, but that doesn't always translate that the weather and everything else is good. So I do apologize if I confuse people showing up after I cancel a class, but that might happen because I'm going camping once in February and once in March, or the plans are. I'll let you know the dates later on. Omicron is still going on. It does seem to be slowly tapering off. It's so much more infectious that actually the overall death rate count is higher than with Delta across the country. Still the best protection is vaccination, especially boosted. The current situation at the hospital as of Thursday, there was 21 patients in the hospital with the virus, 4 in ICU, 3 of the 4 in all the ones in ICU were on the ventilator, and 3 of those and there were not vaccinated. So still being vaccinated is the most important. As you probably followed in the news, if it is tapering down, the hospital rate it's lagged, so usually that follows 2 or 3 weeks after the peak of the infection. So I don't think we're quite at the peak of the hospitalizations and death rate. They're coming out with more and more of the rapid at-home kits. Unfortunately, those of you that are on standard Medicare, it isn't being paid for yet. Anything else, any other insurance, it pays for it. You can get up to 8 a month per person in the household. Whether or not they actually have them in the pharmacies, I don't know. The problem with the rapid one is if you don't have a lot of virus, the test can be false negative. And so if you have symptoms or have exposure, a negative test doesn't, the rapid home test doesn't always tell you that you're actually negative. If it is positive, then you're probably infectious. If you're not sure and the rapid home test is negative, but you think you might have it, the PCR is still the best. That will pick up almost any amount of virus. But the advantage of the home test is it's very quick. Of course, it's at home. And if it is positive, you probably are infectious. The current guidelines is that you need to quarantine 5 days after your positive test, not 5 days after your symptoms started, 5 days after your positive test. And then you can go off quarantine as long as you're not having fever. Not that you're symptom-free, you're probably still going to have if you get it, going to have a cough and have some other symptoms. But what it is 5 days after the positive test, and that you're not having a fever, you can go off of quarantine. Hopefully we won't do that. Nobody knows, except maybe God, I shouldn't say it that way, God knows, that what's going to happen when Omicron goes down. Is there something else following it? I don't think anybody has a clue. So we need to continue what we're doing. Before I go on to Lama Street, any questions about the virus? Anything I can answer?
Do people still come down with the Delta?
Most places, the Omicron has pretty much supplanted the Delta. That is, when you have a virus, Delta was around, it's not as contagious. Omicron kind of took over, and there's really no more Delta in most places. So Delta's really not around.
What about this stealth Omicron that you read about?
Yeah, that's showing up, and how that works. I think we just have to wait. The places in Europe where it was is kind of half and half right now of the Omicron and the stealth. The trouble with the stealth is it's even less likely to be picked up on the rapid test. It seemed to be just, if not more contagious in Omicron, and it, like the Omicron is not causing individually as much illness. Why is there seems to be a dichotomy between how many people are actually sick and dying, is that these are a lot more contagious than the Delta, so more people are getting sick. Delta might get, the Valverde's sick, and one of them will get real sick. The Omicron and the stealth gets almost all of us sick, and even if only, again, one of them gets sick, with the Delta, and only 2 of us get real sick with the Omicron, so many more of us are sick, and so that's what's going on with the Omicron. The stealth is whether or not they end up calling it something else is not clear yet either. They might add another Greek letter to it at some point. But the real problem with all these viruses is if there's such a lot of the virus out, you're going to get variants develop. It's because of the way the mutations go. It's unfortunate we couldn't get more people vaccinated, because if we get the circulating virus load in the community down, then the amount of variants will really go away. So some of the specialists really hope that so many people get sick with Omicron and so many people have been vaccinated, we'll finally get to that magical herd immunity where this all stops. But we'll just have to wait and see. Any other questions about the virus? There's 2 new pill medicines that they're actually have been giving some at the hospital. They still give the antibody treatment if you are sick and are in a high-risk group. So that's all given at the emergency room. The hospital had been pretty much overwhelmed, but as of late last week, they opened up some more of the extended care that they had closed down years ago, and moved out most of their wait lists, and the VA was able to open up their bottom floor again, so the emergency room is not backed up like it was up until late last week. So if you need to go to the hospital, go to the hospital.
Is there going to be another booster shot we need to do?
I don't know. They haven't come out and said. I know that they are actually giving some to people that are very high risk, giving a 4th shot. But I think what they have given a 4th shot in Israel, and so they're kind of looking at what that translates in before they come out with a recommendation whether or not we need a booster. My personal bias is that and this is my guess, is that the Omicron is going to come like the flu, and every fall we're going to have to get or so once a year, going to have to get a shot. Unless they come up with the Holy Grail, which is they've been trying for years, that takes care of all these things, which I don't think is ever going to happen. So I wouldn't be surprised, to answer your question, that we end up once a year having to get another shot. I don't know that for a fact, but that's my suspicion. Going on to Lama Street Creek, and the sellers, and particularly Helene Tajiri, who is the real estate person for the sellers, I've continued to work very hard at getting the property so we can actually have it. Craig has been keeping us informed about what's going on. They've had the electrical inspection, the surveying, they're having the building inspection. They're having the civil engineer look at it because they're going to have to pave the parking lot. And so all that's moving along, but I still think it's a number of months before that all gets done and we can actually have all the permits. My understanding is that the water flow is too low there for the hydrant, so they're probably going to have to build a water tank for fire suppression. Is that what you understand, Larry?
That's what I understood.
And so the major things they're going to have to do is pave the parking lot, which is for us a great thing, and build a water, catchment water tank that they could use if there's a fire. But so I expect this is going to be a while before, but they're still anxious that we buy it, and we're still anxious to buy it. Right now, if something happens to it, it's in their responsibility, so that's where we are with that. Larry, anything else about that?
No, that's
No.
all right.
If you ever see Craig, and especially you see Claire, thank them for all the work that Craig has been doing. He's really been working very hard on this, and we're blessed to have somebody, because years ago when we started this process, Pastor Ian put me in charge because I can run meetings. I have no experience with building. I bought my parents' house. I've never built anything, but I can run a meeting. I rely heavily on people that have knowledge, like Craig and Larry and Brian, that have knowledge of how these things work. I can keep them moving in the right direction, but I have no personal experience. And so I'm just kind of passing on what they tell. So Craig has really been a blessing because he's been doing the point on this. And of course that's what he does, so he has knowledge, but he's giving us his time to take care of this. But I expect it's probably going to be several months before they can wrap that all up. What will happen is that we do have an extension for the buy-sell agreement up until end of February. We'll almost certainly just extend it at that time. If we have more information at the business meeting, it's going to be in a couple weeks, and we can talk about it more then. And, any questions about either one of those things? Okay, let's open up with prayer. Lord, thank you for the time that we have to come to study your word. Lord, we know this was written 2,000 years ago, but human beings are still pretty much the same. Some of the conditions, some of the situations are not quite the same, but overall, we are pretty much unchanged in our desires, our sinfulness, and our troubles getting along with each other. Lord, teach us through your word how that we could live a better Christian life. In your Son's name I pray. Amen. So the next two sections, wrapping up chapter 10, is Paul wrapping up his arguments and discussion that he started in chapter 8. That remember started talking about food that had been sacrificed to idols and sexual immorality. And so this is kind of the wrap up of the last 3 chapters. And chapter 11 will be starting another subject. So I'm going to finish with this, and then we'll start next week with the following, chapter 11. And so the next section is, do not provoke the Lord to jealousy, flee idolatry. This is 10:14 to 22. And he's again has been talking about this since the beginning of chapter 8. And now he's just wrapping it up. We, according to Paul, should have an exclusive relationship with Christ and not with any other worship. And so And then remember that what he's talking about is the pagan feasts represent idolatry at that time. We might go to a religious building, say, I've been using the Hongonji as an example. When we go there for a wedding or some other social event, it really doesn't have the religious overtones that back at this time, Paul's time, had for that. We might go to a wedding. If I remember, actually, Louisa and Milani got married and at least had the reception at this Sangha hall, so it was clearly not a religious. And so eating there, the food was not sacrificed to any idol, is not inappropriate for us. We don't really, as far as I know, you might correct me, have any situation somewhat similar where food is sacrificed to an idol here. But the point about this is that we still sometimes have idolatry. It might not be food, but it might be something else that we put ahead of the Lord, put ahead of Christ, and in essence worship that. Some men, it's football on Sundays, for example. And you could probably come up with a number of other examples that we put in front of Christ, put in front of the Lord. And so what Paul's saying is we need to stay away from that. But Larry, can you start with 10:14?
Therefore, my dear friends, flee from idolatry.
And so this is his admonition, this is his instruction, this is his command to them that he's been building up since chapter 8. Flee from idolatries. And so what happens when we flee? What are we doing? Running away. It's not saying that we need to destroy it, not saying that we need to fight it. He says stay away from it. Why would we want to stay away from something like that? Why do we flee things?
Might be all-consuming.
I'm sorry?
Might be all-consuming.
It can be all-consuming. It can be damaging to us. We flee a fire. We flee a tsunami like they had down in Tonga recently. We try to get away from things that might harm us. How would idolatry harm us?
We might be pulled into idol worship.
That's right. And so it will pull us away from our relationship with Christ, pull us away from our relationship with God. They had a society that having social and religious meals were very common. It was their way of connecting with each other, their way of networking, their way of moving ahead both politically and socially. And so this was going to be hard for them. But it would be much harder than our situation because we interact differently now. Who do we have at our home for a meal? We'll get to more of this. Who typically do we have at our home for a meal? Who do we invite to our house for a meal?
Our neighbors.
What? I'm sorry?
You said our neighbors.
Our neighbors, very close friends and family. But that was not the situation there. They invited people for social situations so that they could network with them both and move ahead socially and politically. And so the meal for them was much more important socially than it is for us. And so not being able to engage in that kind of meal would have been much more hard for them socially, politically, and economically than you might think of today. I don't think any of you have ever been to my house for a meal, but back then almost certainly you would all have been at one time, because that's how they interacted. We interact differently now. And so, in essence, who's at my house? It's usually my family. I don't think I've ever invited my neighbors.
Our neighbors.
And some close friends. We don't tend to have other people that we might engage quite a bit with socially for a meal in our house. 15, Judy?
I speak to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say.
So, he's saying, you were smart enough to figure this out. Is that a nice way of bringing this argument to a close? I think it is, rather than say, you idiots, this is what you need to do. You know, he's saying, you're smart enough to have figured this out. You understand the knowledge. You know, remember, the Corinthians have been very prideful of their knowledge of things. That was the beginning of the letter that talking about that. And so he's actually being nice to them, saying, you're smart enough to figure this out. Think for yourself, you know. If somebody does that to you, how are you likely to respond? Yeah, more positively, you know. We were babysitting my granddaughter. She's 15 months now. And so when we take off her diaper, she likes to run around without her clothes on, and telling her to come and put her diaper on, that does not work. So most of us don't respond too well to somebody telling us, this is what you need to do. Respond better, say, this is what you should do, think for yourself, figure it out. It makes us more likely to engage in what the person actually wants you to do. So this is Paul being nice. 16, Dennis?
It's not, excuse me, it's not the cup of thanksgiving for which we give thanks of participation in the blood of Christ, and it's not the bread that we break of participation in the body of Christ.
So what's he talking about here? Communion. Okay, what we'll have, didn't look at the schedule, that one of these days we'll have it again here. And so this is what we consider the Lord's Supper. And so the Greek for participation can also be translated as fellowship. And so it's not the cup of thanksgiving for which we give thanks, a fellowship in the blood of Christ. And so he's going to make use of the example of, this is a very positive. And so if we participate, we have fellowship with Christ. And that's the Lord's Supper. We're communing with Christ. Does that put us in a situation where it would be easy for us to do that with the idol? Should we be doing that with the idol then? No, we shouldn't. If we are participating, if we are fellowship, because remember, he's wrapping up his argument. What he talked about earlier in the earlier chapter was sexual immorality, how a participant, a fellowship in the body of Christ really could not go out and have sexual relationships with prostitutes at pagan temples. And it's basically the same thing. You can't do both. You can't be one day this, one day that. You know, you need to be all of this or all of that. It cannot be a mixture. Just as an aside, where else do we find information about the Lord's Supper? Where does Pastor usually quote the section right before we eat? This is a trick question. And it has nothing to do with exactly what today's message is. Where do we find the passages he usually quotes?
Is it Luke?
No,
Matthew.
no, Corinthians. It's later on in Corinthians. So it's actually Paul is the one that talks the most about the Lord's Supper. And so pay attention the next time we have Lord's Supper and see what he actually quotes. Okay, Lynn, 17?
Because there is one loaf, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one loaf.
So what does this mean?
We are all one body of Christ.
That's right, we're all one body of Christ. There's one body of Christ. We partake of that one loaf. He's using that as an analogy. And so that makes us all one body. We're all one body of Christ. $18, sorry? Jermaine? Oh, I'm sorry, Debbie's next. Sorry, I'm going wrong.
Consider the people of Israel. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar?
So, most of them would have known the situation, how the Jews dealt with their sacrifices. And remember how the Jews dealt, they had a number of different sacrifices, but basically it was food stuff, either animals or sometimes grain or oil or wine. And what was sacrificed to the altar, some was burnt to the Lord, some was used by the priest and the temple attendants for their substances, and the rest of it was consumed by the person making the sacrifice. And so they would know then that what he's talking about, that people in Israel, the Jews, in their religious practices would be consuming some of the food stuff, the meat or grain or oil or wine that was sacrificed at the altar to the Lord. $19 then? Jermaine?
19. Do I mean then that a sacrifice offered to an idol is anything, or that an idol is anything?
So this is thought to be a little bit of parenthesis, but he's saying, do you think that the food or the sacrifice or worship or the idol is anything? An answer, of course, in his rhetorical questions. Remember, the Greek has tenses that either command a no or a yes answer. And so this one in the Greek commands a no answer. So, do you mean that sacrifice idol is anything? The answer is no. Or that the idol is anything? The answer is no. So he's saying that neither the sacrifice or the idol is anything. So, by itself, if something was to be sacrificed to the idol, is there something wrong with the food before it was sacrificed? Is there anything? Will there be anything wrong with the food? No. No was the answer. Because everything belongs to the Lord. Everything is good from the Lord. And therefore, there's nothing innately wrong with whatever was going to be sacrificed. It's basically that it was sacrificed that there's a problem. the Jews had a number of dietary restrictions. But what did Jesus and later what did Paul say about that? Are we kosher anymore? No. You know, we eat crab and lobster, which was against what they were supposed to do. We eat pork. You know, basically all that is felt to be good. There's nothing wrong with that. You might follow, I think, Pastor Shane's argument that some of the, and it's not just his, that some of the laws of the olden times of the Jews to show that you really couldn't follow that. It was really, we were just too sinful. But whatever reason they had those dietary laws, we don't have to follow them. But this is, 20 is really argument why we need to be careful. So what he's saying is there's really nothing about the sacrifice or the idol, but 20, Joy?
No, but the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons, not to God. And I do not want you to be participants with demons.
Do you believe that there are demons? Yeah. I mean, Christ drove them out. He talked with them. You know, I can't say I really have run across a demon myself, but clearly are demons. And so what Paul doesn't want you to do is associate with any spiritual power. Would the demons be in favor of Christ and the Lord or opposed to them? Opposed to them. So he didn't want you associated with any spiritual power that was opposed to God. The food sacrifice, the idol itself was nothing, but it was associated with the demons. Not with gods, but with demons. And clearly there are demons. And probably still around us. I don't think we recognize them as well as they might have in the past. Anybody? Well, maybe that's not a good thing to ask. I was going to ask if anybody had experience with demons, but I'll just leave it at that. 21? Let's see, where were we? Joy just read that, so we're back to Larry.
You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons.
Okay, so this makes sense? Yeah, you can't do both. You can't be, you know, on one side and also on the other side. You know, this is black and white, not gray. And so you can participate and have full fellowship with the Christ, but that means you can't have participation with demons. This, to me, that makes a lot of sense, but anybody, you know, have a problem, want to talk about that? I think nowadays, you know, we might look at demons differently than maybe back then, but I think they're still around, and so you need not to participate in things that really lead you away from Christ, I think is what they're saying now. But he said, basically, you can't have the Lord's Supper, you can't have the cup of thanksgiving, which is Christ's blood, the bread, and also participate with worship of other idols, which means you're participating with things that are going on with demons. And 22, Judy?
Are we trying to arouse the Lord's jealousy? Are we stronger than He?
And again, this is a rhetorical question with the answer being no. Do we have examples of the Lord being jealous, especially about idol worship?
Yes,
Where do we find that?
in the Ten Commandments.
And where else? Well, that's true, but where else do we actually see times that he was jealous?
The destruction of, what's that? Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah. And so all through the Old Testament, there's, especially in the minor prophets, but all through the Old Testament, there's episodes in Judges, there's, you know, Kings and Chronicles, and all through there's times that Israel suffered God's wrath. And God is a jealous God besides being a loving God, and he will get angry at us if we have fallen away and started idol worship. And he has punished Israel in the past for that. If you look through the Old Testament, there's quite a number of examples. Sodom and Gomorrah is one. It is in the Ten Commandments, that's one of them. Actually number one. And so you look through the destruction of the northern kingdom, the Babylonian captivity, and on, you see where God's jealousy was caused by idol worship, leading to God's wrath, leading to God's punishment. We don't want to do that, do we? No. Okay. Now we'll go on to the last section of 8, 9, and 10, which is summary and applications. Do all for the good of others and the glory of God. This is Paul finally doing the application of how we're supposed to deal with all that he's been talking about all along. Dennis, 23, please.
Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything is acceptable.
Okay, so remember, you know, to be careful in not just taking a phrase out of any of the Bible and using that for a way of life or a dogma. Everything is permissible was a slogan the Corinthians were stating. Another way of saying that is, I have the right to do anything. I can do anything I want. And obviously they had misunderstood, because Paul is trying, in the second phrase of both these things, to correct them. But why would they say that? I can do anything I want. Everything is permissible for me to do. Why? What led them, or what did they get confused about that would lead them to say something like that?
Because maybe the old rules or laws or whatever, like eating the cooked animals and stuff, that was so strict in the old days, and now they're saying you can eat anything because everything from God is good.
So why can
So
we
they're
do that?
confused.
What gives us the ability to do these things that you're talking about?
Our free will.
That's true. But I may be being a little obtuse. What did Christ give us with his sacrifice? What did,
Redeemed us with his blood.
and so we are forgiven.
Yeah.
When are we forgiven? When are we forgiven?
Oh,
In the past,
the past sins and the present and
future sins.
Yeah.
And so what they're confused about, well, I've been forgiven. I can continue to do all this naughty stuff because I've been forgiven. And so they misunderstood that. They misunderstood Christians' liberty, that we have been forgiven. Yes, we're probably going to sin again and again. And we're forgiven for that already. We have the liberty of being in Christ, being forgiven by His sacrifice. But does that mean that doing anything I want is good? No. So that's what Paul's trying to get at them. Yeah, you've been forgiven. Yes, you will be forgiven. But does it mean that doing these things is good for you? Not everything, and that's why he says not everything is beneficial. I might be forgiven from drinking too much or something similar, but that's not good for me. You know, that's you know, I might be forgiven for robbing the bank, but that's not going to be beneficial to me. That's going to be constructive for me. I'm going to end up in the jail. If I drink too much, I'm going to have health problems. And so yes, I've been forgiven. I have Christian liberty, but it doesn't mean that these things are good for me. These things are beneficial. These things are being constructive. Paul is trying to correct their misunderstanding. So again, be a little careful not taking a slogan like he's talking about now. That's why you see it it's written, it's in I'm blocking, it's quotation marks. So you can see that he's actually quoting them. This is not what he is saying. He's quoting the Corinthians, that this is their slogan. And so he's trying to correct them. Yes, that's true, but it's not good for you. Doesn't mean you should be doing it. And he goes on with 24, and I've lost track of where we are. Who was to read next? Lynn, I think.
Nobody should seek his own good, but the good of others.
Okay, so this is the punchline. What are we supposed to be doing? This is 3 chapters to get to this. What are we supposed to be doing? We can do anything we want ourselves. It might not be good for us, but what are we really supposed to be doing?
We should be good examples to others.
We're supposed to be doing things for others. We're supposed to not so much looking at our needs, but we're supposed to be helping others.
And we shouldn't be stumbling blocks.
Exactly. We shouldn't be stumbling blocks. So we shouldn't just seek our good. We should seek the good of others. And so he's taken 3 chapters to get to this punchline. Debbie, go on with 25 and 26.
Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and everything in it.
And so he's quoting the Old Testament. This is actually Psalms 24, verse 1, where he's quoting there. So again, remembering what was going on is that the excess meat, particularly that was sacrificed to idols, some was consumed by the people there, but the rest of it was sold in the market. But other foods were sold in the market too. And it usually wasn't a sign like we would have idol meat, non-idol meat. Unless you asked, you probably didn't know where it came from. And so he's saying, in essence, is if you don't know if it was sacrificed or not, it's okay. So he's in applications. He's talking now about food that you would buy in the market. We don't really have that. Our meat or whatever we buy at Safeway or KTA has not been sacrificed someplace else. And so, but that's how they dealt with it. Does that make sense? You know, if the Lord had said everything's good, and I don't really know if that stuff has been sacrificed or not, do I have a problem with buying it and then consuming it? Paul is saying, no, we shouldn't have a problem with that. Now, on the other side of the coin, if we know it was sacrificed to an idol, should we consume it? And the answer again is no. You know, if we actually know that it was sacrificed, because we don't want to be associating with basically demons, anything that opposed to the Lord. He goes on for his next example. Charmaine, please. 27.
If some unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience.
And so, somebody invites you to come to eat. What Paul is saying is that you should go. And if they give you some food, and you don't know if it was sacrificed or not, you should go ahead and consume it. What he's saying is that, in essence, should we cut ourselves off from unbelievers completely socially or not? No. Why should we still have social relationships with unbelievers?
You know, we have to deal with certain people for certain services.
I'm sorry?
You know, in living in a society,
Yeah.
you have to, you may need services or something that you have to associate with
Okay.
unbelievers.
That's one reason, but what is the reason probably Paul is interested in?
He wants us to evangelize.
Exactly, he wants evangelized. And so one of the best ways is actually have some kind of social relationship with the person. Dennis is right, you couldn't, and we still can't live by ourselves completely cut off for people that are unbelievers. There's no way that we can function. But Paul's interest is what Debbie said, evangelism. This allows you to evangelize somebody by having social situations with them. Okay, 28, Joy?
If anyone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it, both for the sake of the man who told you and for conscience sake.
He talks about conscience, and there's no real good agreement among the commentators whose conscience he's talking about. But clearly, if you go to a meal, what he's talking about, you go to a meal, and somebody else there says, you know, this has been sacrificed to an idol. Paul's saying, don't eat it. Remember, and Debbie had mentioned it, why? Because you don't want to be a stumbling block for somebody. The food itself is okay. That's why if you don't know where it came from the idol or not, it's okay to consume it. But if you know it's been sacrificed to an idol, he's saying don't eat it because you don't want to be a stumbling block. Because some of the commentators assume that either this was an unbeliever that told him that, or somebody that he was talking about earlier as being weak, somebody probably a new Christian, and you didn't want to be a stumbling block to them. And it goes on to clarify this. I'm sorry, we're back to Larry Dennis. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. 29, Larry?
The other man's conscience, not yours. Why should my freedom be judged by another's conscience?
And so he's a little confusing here, but what he's basically somewhat parenthetical saying that, you know, I have freedom, that's why I don't need to be judged, but I'm going to do it for the other person's sake. You know, if it was just up to me, you might way to say it, I would be okay to eat it, but I don't want to do it for the other person's who might feel differently. And so who in essence is he trying to help? Is he trying to help himself or trying to help somebody else? Yeah, he's trying to help somebody else. Going back to what he said earlier, nobody should seek his own good but the good of others. And so Paul feels, what he's trying to say here is Paul feels that he doesn't believe in idols. The idol and the sacrifice is nothing. And if it's just up to me, my conscience is clear to go ahead and eat it, but I'm not going to eat it because of somebody else. And therefore I'm trying to do good for somebody else. I know it's a little confusing, but that's the best that they come up with, trying to explain that. 30, Judy?
If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for?
And so what he's saying, is that if I go to that meal and I don't know the food is, and I have blessed it, I've had a prayer of thanksgiving, the food is therefore blessed. And that's pretty much what we do now in most families. We have a little prayer before we have a meal, and so the food has been blessed. $31, Dennis?
So whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God.
So everything we do should be for the glory of God. And that's, again, him wrapping up these arguments. What we should be doing, in essence, is for the good of others and for the good of the Lord, the good of God. And so we have to look at it with that mindset. Not the mindset that the Corinthians were saying in that slogan that everything is permissible, I can do anything I want. We should be doing things for the good of others and for the good of the glory of God, not for our own self. And I think that pretty much resonates with Christ's life. That's what his whole life was. That he was doing things for others, not doing things for himself. And so when we try to be more Christ-like, it's not that we have Christian liberty that we can do anything we want. We have Christian liberty, we're forgiven because we are going to sin, but we should be doing good for others and for the glory of God. And things that we might be free to do, like eat the idol food back here as an example, we should not be doing it because we're trying to be good for others. Some people might be weak in their faith, and that might make us a stumbling block to them. And we should be doing things for the glory of God. And I'll try to wrap this up. And so 32, Lynn?
Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the Church of God.
Go on with 33, please.
Even as I try to please everybody in every way, for I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved.
Okay, so this is, again, where the argument is coming. Why do I want to not be a stumbling block? Why do I want to be good for others? Why do I want to help them and try to help them? What is the ultimate reason that Paul gives here?
To save them.
Yeah, he wants to save them. And what does that mean to be saved? Yeah. Instead of said to obey, to go to the Lord, to believe in the Lord. And so Paul is trying to do everything he can to save people. And that means he doesn't want to be a stumbling block, even though he feels that he has the freedom, because the idols, the food sacrifice idol is nothing. He doesn't want to be a stumbling block. He's looking for the good of other peoples and for the glory of God. And I will read the last, where they divided up these chapters long after these were written, actually about 450 years later. So verse 1 of 11 really fits with chapter 10, and is follow my examples as I follow the example of Christ. And so Christ's examples, his whole life was trying to do good for others, not good for himself. Obviously going to the cross was definitely not good for himself, but it's how we are saved, how we are blessed. And Paul's saying, I've been trying to follow Christ's examples, and so you should follow mine and Christ's examples in your life. Not that you don't have Christian liberty, but not everything that you might want to do is good for you or constructive, and definitely not good for other people, and not good for the glory of God. And your focus should not be on, wrapping up his argument, on the fact that I have liberty to do anything I want, is that I should be doing things that are good for other people, not necessarily good for me, and I should be doing things for the glory of God. So I'm going to stop here because we started a whole new section after this, and I've almost run out of time anyhow. Any questions about what we've been talking about for quite a while now? So Paul's ultimate application is basically those phrases: do good for others and do good for the glory of God. And that's the application of what he's been talking about. Why we should flee idolatry, why we should stay away from other sinful things like sexual immorality. And Debbie, I'm going to ask you to close this with prayer, but I think we still need to pray for Lynn too.
Heavenly Father, just thank you for Dr. Dan leading this Bible study, Sunday school Bible study, and we're just so grateful that he's so knowledgeable that you can clarify a lot of things for us so that we can apply what we've learned. We ask that we pray to apply the goals of Paul as he instructed the Corinthians, and that we don't cause people to stumble in their relationship with the Lord, especially if they're new Christians, and that we are there to evangelize people so that they can know the grace and peace of our Lord Jesus Christ. We ask that you continue to heal Liv as she has a long road ahead of her. Thank you for taking care of the pain with minimal medication. We just thank you for her and the brightness she gives in this class. And we praise you and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
So it's not that I'm all that knowledgeable, I just have good resources.
Well, knowledge, but you're wise. You're wise.